Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we'll be looking at various aspects of the relationship between India and Russia. Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended the 18th edition of the Indo-Russian Annual Summit at St. Petersburg last week, where he, along with Russian President Vladimir Putin, put all speculations to rest, signing the General Framework Agreement and the Credit Protocol for the construction units of 5 and 6 at Kudankulam nuclear power plant. Now, both the countries also agreed to expand their bilateral economic cooperation to third countries with joint development projects in various sectors. President Putin also clarified that Russia does not have any tight military relationship with Pakistan and asserted that its close friendship with India cannot be diluted. Well, to discuss these issues and more, we have an esteemed panel today. We have former ambassador to Russia, Prabhat Shukla ji, joining us, currently the distinguished fellow in Vivekananda International Foundation. We also have Bharat Karnad, who is a research professor at the Center for Policy Research and a national security expert. And also Pramit Chaudhuri, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times and former member of the National Security Advisory Board. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me here on India's World. If I could start with you, Ambassador Shukla. Before Modi's trip to St. Petersburg, some of the headlines that were screaming out loud were, of course, is India losing Russia? Can India mend its ties with Russia? There were a lot of critics were, of course, saying that India-Russia partnership was one that was in need of repair. Do you think that has been to some extent, that those thoughts have been calmed down to some extent after this trip?
To an extent, yes. But I think it would be important to see where the relationship is today, as it really is. There are some very positive aspects, and I think not only have you highlighted them, but I think the point that President Putin made, that what they are doing with India is unique. They're not doing it with any other country in the world. And that is true, by the way. So there are the pluses. I think the dichotomy that I am seeing is that on the bilateral side, things are getting better, closer, stronger, and relying on a greater and greater degree of trust. It's the regional relationships that are causing me concern, and it's not a question of arms supplies to Pakistan. I think that is important, but it would not be the major source of concern for me, because as President Putin has pointed out, a lot of our Western partners are supplying much more sophisticated weaponry to Pakistan. No, I think the danger is that Russia is being sucked into the Sino-Pakistan nexus in the South Asian region, and principally that concerns Afghanistan. And a comparison of the joint statements that we have issued over the years, even last year, October last year in Goa, you can see the September, I think it was, you can see the difference. Afghanistan got 2 solid paragraphs in the statement last year. This year, not even a full paragraph, about half a line in a general paragraph on regional issues. Likewise, I would say from the Russian perspective, we have been referring to Ukraine in the past. This time there's no reference to Ukraine. So there are some areas of concern, I think, for both sides. But the conclusion that I would draw from this is not that things are hopeless or that it's all over. No, not at all. We've been through this before, the late 60s, the late 70s, the early 80s, and each time we have come back closer and stronger. What it means is that both sides have to work harder in order to understand each other's concerns and, to the extent possible, address them. Most important, I think, from India's side, is that we have to start delivering on what we agree and what we promise, both in terms of bilateral commitments or in terms of these kind of joint statements where we list a whole lot of things. And for instance, our entire Eurasia approach is unworkable without an Iran connection. Now, we have talked about various things relating to Iran in the joint statement, starting with the North-South transport corridor. Are we willing to work on that? Are we willing to work on Chabahar? That kind of thing. So if you are looking at a Eurasia policy, you only have an Iran option because Afghanistan, Pakistan is closed, Further east is China, also closed. So that's your only option.
All right. Pramit, do you agree that you know, as far as the relationships are concerned, you know, of course, when we write those headlines, it grabs the attention definitely. But on the whole, the relationship that has been, it's been pretty interdependent to a certain extent. That still holds, do you think, or there's more to it? There's more to that than just India or Modi or Putin saying that things are all fine. You know, it's okay. I mean, there's a US as well with which, you know, which has ties with Pakistan. But you know, you don't stop you don't stop the relations with them. You don't stop business with them. Why would anyone stop business between India and Russia? You know, but is there more to this story than what is being said?
I agree with Ambassador Shukla. I don't think the Pakistan issue is a big. It's a symptom of other issues, but by itself is really not a particularly important issue. There are, I would argue, 4 elements to the relationship. One is the energy relationship, which is very strong. 30%, I think, of OVL, ONGC, Videsh Limited, entire oil and gas supplies are now come from Russian fields. Sakhalin is probably their most profitable field that they actually have equity stakes. And Russia is one of the few countries in the world that will actually give us equity stakes at reasonable prices. And the nuclear relationship is effectively, it's the only country now we're buying reactors from, especially since Westinghouse has now gone bottoms up. I don't expect us to buy any overseas reactors from anybody else for a while. Then there's a defense relationship that is still strong, partly because of legacy. We will have to continue to buy Russian equipment and spare parts for a very long time. However, that is starting to fray, partly because Russia doesn't make some of the kinds of technology we need. For example, drone technology. We are now, we have the world's largest Israeli-made drone fleet. But it's not an area where the Russians have been particularly good, especially the variety of drones that we need. There are certain other technologies which Russia gives to China that we therefore are reluctant to therefore share or get from Russia. And therefore I would suspect that that relationship, while it will continue, Russia will be one of 3 or 4 partners on the defense side rather than what it used to be, which is overwhelmingly the dominant partner. And I think this year we will see Israel, for example, become the largest single supplier of weapons, but at least for this one fiscal year in terms of the defense side. On the third side, and I'd agree again with Ambassador Shukla, we are having problems on the regional side. Russia is very clear, I think, that their relationship with China has achieved a certain stage in which they feel they can no longer give us a favorable position in terms of many things.
Okay.
I once met their defense minister, I don't know if he's still defense minister, Sergei Ivanov, and he was very clear, we can no longer discriminate between you and China. And their China relationship is now one of almost dependency, I think, economically. When I've talked to Russians, they said we really have no choice, partly because of sanctions. And Afghanistan is one of the areas where Russia has become very, very close to the Chinese and Pakistan position. And that has now and since Pakistan is now treated in the Indian government, when I talk to the government at least, as a subset of our problems with China, this is now a big issue. The fourth area where there is simply no forward movement is on the commercial relationship.
Yes, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that, Pramit. I'm sorry, we'll have to take a quick break here. And Mr. Karnad, we'd like to come to you as well after that and, you know, take this forward as to what are the levels really as far as Indo-Russia relationships are concerned. And this time onwards, we're of course asking, is there emerging frontiers really? We'll come to that in a bit. A quick break and we'll be back. Stay with us. Welcome back, where you're watching India's World, where we're discussing Indo-Russia ties. And Pramit, before the break, you were talking about the commercial aspect as well, which is lacking as far as the relationship is concerned. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, we have a G2G economic relationship, whether it's oil or it's nuclear reactors or it's weapons, where it's government-to-government purchases for the most part. However, private Indian companies still avoid Russia. They say Russia is a very difficult place to work, to do business. Getting a Russian visa is now, I gather, still a major source of contention. And the nature of the Russian economy is very different. For example, there's almost no SME, no small medium enterprise sector in Russia. And as a consequence, our attempts, for example, the so-called BRICS Chamber of Commerce, which was designed to promote SME trade between India and Russia and the other BRICS countries. When I talked to them, they said, well, there are no Russian SMEs. We don't know what to do. The Indian SMEs delegations go there and come back and say, who are we supposed to do business with?
Yes.
So that continues to be an area where there's been very minimal growth. And I don't see that changing. The very nature of our economies, Russia remains very much a commodity-based government, state-owned economy, and our economy is now diversifying in different directions. And there are other options. The private sector of India has so many other places to go nowadays that for them, Russia continues to be a very low on their priority list.
Okay. Mr. Karnad, you know, before Prime Minister Modi started this trip, one of the concerns, or for that matter, you know, what really people wanted to gauge, or for that matter, the Indian government wanted to gauge, was, you know, the scenario post-Obor. We do know that Germany is, of course, you know, not particularly keen on, you know, the Silk Route, not particularly because they feel it's very China-centric and they don't really see it being fruitful for them, at least. But in the case of Russia, it did take part in the Obor summit. You know, so in that front, and we do know, of course, India boycotted it. So in that sense, you know, how does India gauge where Russia lies as far as that's concerned? Because India does feel that it is, it touches on its sovereignty when it, you know, passes through, of course, POK.
Yeah, the problem is this: the Obor, or the that kind of initiative, is the only game in town as far as Russia is concerned. Yeah. And insofar as the connectivity with Central Asia and Russia's own designs to reassert itself in this part of the world is concerned. So if China is going to bankroll it by connecting and building highways and railways and so on, Russia, for, you know, in its own interest, doesn't see any problems with it, because it doesn't have the financial wherewithal to subsidize this kind of development. Yes. So it's hardly a surprise that they are very much on the side of the Obor initiative. Now, the problem is that India has not been able to offer an alternative. Long ago, when Jaswant Singh in the Vajpayee regime talked about the Ganges-Mekong connectivity, we have done nothing with it. Now, we have problems with delivering on simple road-making equipment to Myanmar. So we are really not in the game. Yes. And then, therefore, for Delhi to, you know, squawk about this or that country going on to the Chinese side sounds a bit silly. Okay. Because after all countries gauge initiatives, international, regional, from the prism or the filter of their own national interest. Yes. If it serves their purposes, they'll go ahead with it, you know, with supporting it. If it doesn't, they'll stand aside. Yes. Now, India is doing so, you know, standing aside for strategic reasons. Not that we can't benefit. We can, but we don't want to, because that is, as was mentioned, this is a Sino-centric arrangement. Yes. And reasonably so. If they're going to set up the whole thing, it's hardly to serve India's purposes or Russia's purposes. Look, there's already something called the Northern Distribution Network in Russia that connects Russia with the Central Asian republics. That's already there. Now, had we been more quick on, say, delivering and going on with our Chabahar port development and building up the north-south corridor, rail and road corridor, to connect up with the Northern Distribution Network, you'd have a very different, you know, situation, very different scenario, in which everybody would have liked to have plugged in. And that would have been an Indian initiative. All we do is talk, talk, and more talk, deliver nothing. Yes. So this is our problem, has always been our problem. We are very low on deliverables in terms of not talking, but actually implementing the programs that we promised. Speaking about talking, you know, after missing 2 deadlines, both the countries finally, of course, agreed on what I pointed out in the introduction itself, the General Framework Agreement, 5 and 6 units of the Kudankulam nuclear plant, you know, which is, of course, going to cost 50,000 crore rupees. How significant do you see that as being? Look, the point, I think, is Kudankulam, the 5 and 6 unit, was virtually inevitable. This has been talked about and has been on the cards for years together. So that's not a surprise. But it's a project that started when? 1988.
you know.
No, that's okay.
Yes.
But the entire Kudankulam is grandfathered by the by that agreement, and that's why it's getting in under the radar as far as the non-proliferation concerns and the other, you know, sanctions and those regimes, control regimes. So we are coming in under the radar. Now the point is this: India has, in a sense, I think very recently the Modi government has again talked about nuclear energy as a source of power and so on and so forth. Now, the thing to do is to go with our own advanced pressurized heavy water reactors that we have built, designed, and we are experts in. By the way, we are globally the foremost nation as in APHWRs, the advanced pressurized heavy water reactors, the 700 kilowatt prototype, and so on, that is going to you know, go on stream. This is what we have to do. We have to begin investing in our own technology instead of buying from Westinghouse, which is, you know, is upended, is not there anymore. And if we end up rescuing the Westinghouse by paying out huge, humongous sums for an uncertified reactor, uncertified by the American Atomic Energy Commission for safety reasons, incidentally. So we'll have a huge problem. This is what a few of us have been pointing out for years together.
Okay.
And so this is not the way to go. Russia, whether anybody likes it or not, has been the one country that has been fairly free in giving reasonably cutting-edge technology, whether it's military, whether it's you know, in other matters and so on, and has given us very strategic assistance in many of our projects, and that cannot be denied. It is not the sort of thing that you'll get from any other source. Let's be very clear about it. You'll not get it from America. You'll not get it from the West, assuming they can, you know, produce such technologies.
All right.
So this is where we stand. So Russia becomes very important because this is the primary source of high technology in the military realm and in terms of Moscow's willingness to assist us in critical areas of our own development.
All right, we continue discussing this. A quick break here. We'll be back. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching India's World, where we're discussing Indo-Russia ties. And before the break, we were, of course, talking about India's nuclear energy and how it can, of course, benefit you know, the industry, how it can benefit from Russia. Ambassador, if I could come to you, you know, India and Russia agreeing to set up joint ventures for manufacturing aircraft, automobiles, various other you know, industries as well. We also touched upon the Eurasian Economic Union, of course, and how India can also benefit from that. If you can elaborate really on where India lacks as far as, you know, tapping really into that particular zone.
Yeah, sure. Just to go back to one point, I encounter this quite a lot. There's a sense in New Delhi that OBOR is a done deed. There's no stopping the Chinese. All you can do is sign on or else stand outside with your nose pressed to the glass while the guys are partying inside. That's not going to happen. China is in pretty serious economic trouble. And until now, mine was a fairly lonely voice that was saying this. But now Moody's have also downgraded their debt. And their debt is something like 300% of the GDP. There's no other G20 economy that has that level of debt. Rich they might be, they have $3 trillion, we are told, even that is a suspect figure. A more important, what no one ever talks about is that their external debt is something like $1.4 trillion. So it's not as if they have unlimited funds to throw around here and there and build a rail there and a pipeline there. It's not going to happen like that.
Okay.
So it's not as if the game is up and that we've lost out and that we have been foolish and not signing on. As I said earlier, any Eurasian strategy that we have has to rely on Iran given the current geopolitical arrangements. Something may happen, you know, a lot of these countries are very fragile. Who knows what the Kurds are planning to hold a referendum in Iraq this calendar year. Who knows what sort of trigger that might be. So the whole situation is very fluid. What we have to focus on is really two things, and we are doing one part reasonably well, not as well as we could, which is the economy. The second is build up our hard power. Frankly, this is a moment in history when hard power is at a premium. And unfortunately, our history teaches us that we won our independence by spinning the charkha. And so all we do is spin yarns. It's a time of hard power and we really need to focus on that. Now, as to your question, look, the North-South corridor was actually intended to give us an into the Eurasian landmass. The Iranians are quite keen. Chabahar is the symbol of it, but we have been dragging our feet. I hope that that changes. I remember that when General John Nicholson had come here from Kabul, he is the commander of the US and international forces there, he had actually named Chabahar as a positive project. So I think all systems are go. We have to now really get down to delivering on the kind of promises that we've made, number one.
Yes.
But more importantly, they are promises that are in our strategic interest. Now, I don't know what is going to happen vis-a-vis manufacturing cars with Russian collaboration. I was following the business meeting also. As actually, I was the guy who set up that CEO's council when I was ambassador there. And it yielded very meager results. And I get a sense that even this time round, the results have been pretty meager. And in fact, you know, much of the investment, for example, in telecom, or there were these other ones that were done for steel and so on, many of them have actually been rolled back, and some have sold out, some have sold, in some cases the Russian government has taken over.
Yes.
So I really think we need to focus with the Russians on energy. And I'm glad to say that, in fact, Mr. Putin mentioned this, that they're going to be supplying LNG. For LNG, I believe it doesn't make sense for us to transport all the way from the far east of Russia to India. The best way is to do a four-way swap. You know, Qatar supplies to Japan and Korea,
yes,
which are the largest importers of LNG. They can supply to us, and what Russia would supply to us can be swapped and sold in Japan and Korea. Both Qatar and Russia are the major gas players in the world, along with Iran.
Yes.
So I think some such arrangement would make a lot more sense. The other thing, of course, is defense technology. And I think even today, the kind of technology which the Russians are willing to share with us is something nobody else will. For example, a simple thing like jet engines.
Yes.
It's almost 100 years old, that technology. We are not being able to make a viable jet engine. We've done pretty well, better than the Chinese, by the way, but not good enough yet.
Okay.
And I think on this, the Russians have enormous experience. Some of the best jet engines, in fact, all the jet engines with the Chinese are using on their fighter aircraft are of Russian provenance.
Yes. Pramit, if I could, end with you, because we're coming to the end of the show. All this while we're talking about how India can benefit and how India is looking at this relationship. But how is Russia looking at this relationship? With the fact that the past few years, India has become closer to the US. When it comes to that, the global positioning, of course, is crucial as well. Is that a factor for even Russia?
Well, I think when I've talked to the Russians, I think they accept that they are also a little nervous about the fact that they are becoming overly dependent on China. And as long as Western sanctions remain against Russia, they had hoped that President Trump would lift them, but Trump is facing too much opposition, I think, from within his own, from his own government on that point. They would like to diversify their economic, definitely their economic relationships. And among the larger economies, once you take out the Western countries and you have China already in an overly dominant place, it really only leaves India. And so they would like to do this, but they struggle. The Russians, my sense when I've talked to them, is they actually have difficulty understanding how the Indian system, especially the private sector, works. They're very comfortable with government-to-government relations.
Yes.
They even said, when we want to talk to your government says, deal with our private sector, we say, which private sector companies? You tell us.
Yes.
And on the Indian side, that's not how it works. You have to go and find it out yourself. That's where the Russians want to do something, but they really don't know how to do it. And it's going to be one of the areas that something has to be done. It has to be done, ironically, at the government-to-government level to help them to work with our private sector.
All right. That's about the time I have.
Could I just
very
take
quickly.
30 seconds?
Yes, sir.
There's one thing I want to mention, which is that while there are tensions between the Russians and the Americans, I think India is almost uniquely placed to try and bridge those tensions. And I think that's a role which the Russians would really welcome from our side. I hope we can take some initiative in this regard.
All right. We'll leave it there for the moment, of course, on India's World. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll come back, of course, next week, same time. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.